So how is everyone feeling temperature-wise? Is it too chill? What's that? Cold? Okay, I'll go inquire about that. Thank you.
What do you want? Do you want to do rock, paper, scissors? Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Oh, okay, rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Shoot on shoot.
What?
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
So remind me
Okay.
how we did.
Rock, paper, scissors, you hit, and then shoot is when you play your rock, paper, scissors.
I forget how to do that.
Rocks are this,
Yeah.
scissors are this, paper's this.
So what does that mean?
Paper goes over rock, rock smashes scissors.
All right.
Best out of three. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. You can go first, it's so fun.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for choosing to be here with us today. It has been interesting conversations about several different kinds of topics to date. And I am Phil Curran. I'm pastor at Columbia United Christian Church. And it is a real honor for me to be sitting with Rabbi Mikey Hess Weber. I can't ever remember, is it Weber Hess or Hess Weber? So would you like to say a word, Rabbi, about you? Just
Sure. I'm the rabbi at CJC. Can you hear me through this microphone?
No.
Hello, and it's cold. Thanks, Mike. My name is Rabbi Michael Hess Weber from CJC, Columbia Jewish Congregation. It's wonderful to be here, and it's so nice to see everyone in the room. I know some people are joining via live stream, but the people in the room are mingling in tables with people you don't know, and I was listening to your conversations, and what a real blessing that is to really live into this space that we are a part of. And I am so honored to be able to talk about this difficult subject with someone I respect so very much, Pastor Phil. So Phil is going to begin today.
So it is a difficult topic, especially in these days when it's so politicized, right? And so I choose to approach this not through any political lens, but through a theological lens, as I understand. Just as a point of reference and clarity, the congregation I serve here at CUCC is affiliated or aligned with three Protestant denominations. That is Church of the Brethren, the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and the United Church of Christ. The United Church of Christ and the Church of the Brethren both have connections to Europe, Germany. The founders of the Christian Church Disciples, primarily Alexander and Thomas Campbell, as well as Barton W. Stone and others, were here in the States. The Campbells came from Ireland. They were Presbyterian. They came to Ireland and began this new denomination on the frontier with others. All three of them have position papers, if you will, on this topic, abortion. And each of them kind of aligns with the other. If I would kind of categorize it, I would say the Church of the Brethren raises more question about the topic as far as acceptance of it. The Christian Church Disciples of Christ and the United Church of Christ, at both of their gatherings years ago, basically said, we believe that this is a personal decision and that this decision must be made by a woman who, with her own conscience and in consultation with others she chooses to include in that decision. And so I would say that it's not a position that either prohibits or pushes. It just sort of to the individual. And so I think that many of us, let me personalize it, for me, that is a good place. I have to say that it's kind of weird being a male Protestant clergy person addressing an issue that is specifically related to women, but there are only male clergy in the building except for the rabbis, and so it's what we get. So I would say that for me personally, it is an issue that one I constantly wrestle with all the time. I don't think that there is, I think it's situationally specific, and that it should be totally banned or all for is not where I pitch my tent. I think that each situation is very, very different. I understand that in the sacred texts there are references to our creation starting in the womb, of course. For instance, Psalm 139 reads, "For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb." And I get that, and I totally, in a perfect world, would celebrate that. But we do not live in a perfect world. We live in a world that is complicated and messy, and especially so for some more than others. And so I think that there are probably socioeconomic factors that have to be considered, as well as health of mom, child. And those are just two, but there are many other matters that if a person gets to the place where she must make this decision, the denominations with which I associate would leave that to the individual without there being any withholding of communion or any kind of alienation. In other words, without any punishment. There's obviously a distinction between Protestant and Catholic Christian theology on this issue, and so I represent the Protestant issue, the Protestant part of Christianity today.
In Judaism, when we hear someone, we can say shamati, which means I heard. So shamati, Pastor Phil. Thank you so much for your wisdom, and I'm glad you went first. All right, so now for the Reconstructionist Jewish perspective. Maybe even before I start, I think there very likely are people in this room who have been impacted by abortion, and I want to acknowledge that and acknowledge that tenderness, that it's easy to get carried away and talking about texts and proof texts about why our rabbis say this or that, and I want to honor that this isn't just theoretical debate, right? This is real life, and so I want to make space for that and respect the multiple experiences and truths in the room. And I want to say that in Judaism, the way we come to our law or halakha is through logic, is through dialogue, is through negotiation. So rarely is there in the Torah a law that is so clear and straightforward that we know how to observe it. What we get, though, is through the ages, our rabbis sitting together and having intellectual and philosophical and theological debates about how to understand Torah and about how to apply Torah to life in the world, in the cultural context that they find themselves in. And so we then look at the debates of the rabbis and discern how we walk through the world. So it's really hard to say, this is all to say, that it's really hard to say Judaism believes X or Judaism believes Y. That's really an oversimplification, because on any topic, there are a million voices. Give one rabbi, ask one question, and get 100 answers. So what I will say to start is that there are texts in Judaism that support abortion. And not just support abortion, but require abortion. So while there are multiple opinions around terminating pregnancy in our community, I feel confident saying that reproductive freedom is a Jewish value, and I'll explain why I say that. So I think a good place to start is to try to understand the Jewish view of the status of a fetus. Because I know there are some religious traditions that say that conception is the beginning of life, and that is not true in Judaism. So in the rabbinic view of when life starts, and when I say rabbinic, I mean post-biblical, in the rabbinic view, a fetus is not alive and is not a person. And at most, that fetus is a body part of a mother. Like the thigh is a text that we receive again. So it's a life and potentiality. And in the Hebrew Bible, which is much earlier, it's made very clear that a fetus does not have the same legal standing or legal personhood as the mother. So I'm wondering if I should read you this text. I'll read you this text. It's from Exodus 21. Verse 22 through 25. When men fight and one of them pushes a pregnant woman and a miscarriage results, but no other damage ensues, the one responsible shall be fined. But if there are other further damages to the mother, the penalty shall be life for a life. So when a fetus is lost, there's a monetary reparation. Yeah. If damage occurs to the mother, then it becomes a much harsher punishment. And in rabbinic literature, a fetus is referred to as mere water up to 40 days after conception, and then for the duration of the pregnancy, the fetus is considered to be as the thigh of its mother, so a part of the body of the mother. So the question then becomes, when does life begin? And in most rabbinic sources, life is not considered to have begun until the majority of the baby has emerged. In some rabbinic sources, the discrepancy is often about what part of the body has to emerge in order for the baby to be officially alive. Some rabbis say the head, some say the majority of the body, some say when the baby takes its first breath, and then the life of the baby, or when the fetus sort of shifts into personhood, some rabbis take that to 30 days. That if a baby dies within the first 30 days of its life, it's not considered a loss of life, which means that there traditionally, and this might sound cruel to us, but traditionally there's no funeral and there's not mourning. We don't observe our traditional mourning practices. And this, I think, emerged from a time when infant mortality was much higher. So babies died all the time. So it wasn't until day 30 when the life could be counted on to be sustained. Okay. I have all these proof texts for you, but we don't have time. So, while Jewish tradition does not consider terminating a pregnancy as ending a life, there is an obligation to save the life of a mother if her life is in danger. And so abortion is not only permitted, but absolutely required. This comes up, Maimonides, who's a 12th century rabbi and sage, someone who we lean to a lot for his rabbinic wisdom when we're thinking about how to live as Jews, actually considers a fetus, when a fetus is threatening the life of the mother or the carrier, Rambam or Maimonides calls the baby a rodef. So a rodef is a pursuer in a negative sense of the word. So someone who is pursuing someone to kill them or to steal from them or to hurt them. And so Maimonides actually calls the infant or the fetus a rodef, meaning they need to be, and how we deal with a rodef is to end their lives in order to save them from sinning. So this is 12th century theology and philosophy, but considering that the fetus in the womb is actually going to kill the mother is a very poignant perspective. So where we get philosophical debate in the Jewish world, the modern Jewish world, is what does it mean to save a mother? So if we are obligated to save the mother, does that mean simply physically save her? Or does it mean mentally and emotionally? Does it mean financially? This is where there's a lot of debate. But what I'll say is that even our most orthodox rabbis will most often lean toward the more lenient understanding of the word save a life. And I'll read you a quote from Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein, who writes from a majority Orthodox perspective. And I bring an Orthodox perspective because the Orthodox community feels maybe the most tethered to law. But it's certainly not the only perspective in the Jewish community. But Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein says, "It would seem to me that issues such as dignity of persons, domestic peace, and pain of the mother and the family would all carry significant halachic or legal weight and should be considered in making decisions about terminating a pregnancy." So what Rabbi Lichtenstein is lifting up is that saving the life of a mother isn't only a consideration of physical life, right, but of human dignity, of human safety, of shalom bayit, or peace in the family, peace in the home, and also just building a just world where people have the resources they need and the access that they need. I'll add one last piece, which is that there are texts that our rabbis, though they're not specifically about the termination of pregnancy, there are texts that lift up the rabbinic view that a person is considered the authority when it comes to making decisions about their own body and about their medical care, that uphold that the autonomy of an individual is the most important thing when making medical decisions. So those texts don't mention abortion in them, but if we draw a direct logical line from one to the other, which is often what we're doing in Judaism, then they can be interpreted to also apply to abortion. So with no prohibition against abortion and guided by the values of protecting an already existent life and preserving human dignity and justice and peace, not to mention bodily autonomy, where we end up, hi Bob, where we end up is that we find ourselves as Jews in a place where we very often find ourselves, which is with a question. And that question, I'm going to quote Rabbi Leah Berkowitz, who says that when we take all of life into consideration, the question we're left when determining whether to terminate a pregnancy or not, as Jewish people, is the question, what is my most life-affirming choice in this situation? So sort of echoing what Pastor Phil said, that we leave it to the mother to decide. And the mother gets to choose based on all the circumstances, mother or parent, the person carrying the child, gets to decide based on all the circumstances of their lives what is the right decision for them. And I am happy to provide source texts for anyone that's interested, if you want them. And I also want to say that I'm here standing in for Rabbi Linda from Beit Aviv, who was supposed to be here today and had to fly to Australia. And so I just want to ask us all to hold her in our hearts and think of her, send her some healing wishes and prayers as we move through the rest of our week. Okay.
What's the term when you're heard?
Shamati.
Thank you. Thanks, Rabbi. So we'll open it up to you for questions, and please, when you have one, come to the microphone here, and we will reply. Hopefully.
Thank you both. Rabbi Michael, you've made it clear that there's a range of Jewish opinion, and Pastor Phil, you distinguish between Protestant and Catholic, right. But some Protestant denominations also say abortion is wrong. And can you talk a little about sort of the shape of the Protestant opinion?
It's an excellent observation. Interestingly, as my point in that was, so as one who has attended Catholic high school, I remember distinctly in religion class being shown the video of an abortion, and it was stomach turning. And so that image remains with me, right? I mean, I think that has really impacted me. If I were to categorize myself, I would hope that I would be in that camp with Cardinal Joseph Bernardine, who sort of there's this ethic called seamless garment that means you are holy life, so that you are not only personally would not choose abortion, but neither would you choose the death penalty, and you would be against war, and you would be all of those things. You would be peaceful. And yes, some Protestants do, many Protestants object to abortion, evangelical Protestants in particular. Interestingly, the anti-abortion movement, the little bit I know of its history, was that it was started by liberal Christians, and then came along fundamentalist Christians who, in the late 70s, saw it as a way to get on board with a political agenda, and that's when Jerry Falwell sort of emerged and took this up as one of his main topics of sermons in order to get Ronald Reagan elected. And so I think the history of understanding it is unique. And then the liberals said, well, we can't be with you. If you're going to be evangelical and anti-abortion, then we're not going to be anti-abortion anymore. I don't know, that's overstating it, but I understand that there is some political influence on the decision. I would say that many people, so let me just say that yes, the answer to the question is yes, Catholics are not alone in their opposition to abortion. What I meant to say in that comment was that I don't know how evangelicals may, I use the word punish, but in my mind that's what it is. When someone violates church law, the church has ways it can kind of sanction people, right? I mean, we heard some cardinals, I mean, that may be up to the cardinal, but for instance, we know that Joe Biden has been named as not being worthy to receive the Eucharist. We would not do that. I would, as a pastor of a congregation, I wouldn't even tell someone who came to me for advice what they should do. I would hopefully guide them to a place where they would feel at peace about their decision, and then that would include theology. So we do it a little differently, and I'm not saying that necessarily one's right, one's wrong, but we would not, as a pastor in my congregation, I would say, since you have done this, you cannot come to the table. I don't have that authority, nor would I do it pastorally. But thank you for the observation.
Are there any references in the New Testament or in any theological writings since the New Testament relating to abortion?
Not to my awareness. I think that all of that was First Testament. Any of that was First Testament law. I do think that Jesus obviously, by not directly but indirectly, by including people on the margins, I think his whole ministry was about celebrating life in all forms and fashions, and but I don't know. I kind of call to mind Jimmy Carter as he speaks of two different kind of issues that Christians struggle with and try to make sense of, and that one is abortion and the other is same-gender marriage. And Carter says that he is opposed to abortion but not same-gender marriage because Jesus didn't talk about it. Well, to your point, I'm not sure that Jesus talked about abortion either. So I think we're left on our own at that point.
Does this issue have anything to do with when a soul becomes part of a person?
That is a great question. All right, I'll start by saying that we do have texts, rabbinic texts, that tell us that the soul, that the fetus, that a soul enters a body. I'm looking for the right word. I actually have When is a soul placed in a person? When they're in the womb. We do have proof texts of that. This is what our tradition does with it. So the rabbis, Talmudic rabbis, taught that the soul didn't only exist in the body, but also was fully existing outside of the body, so that the soul, in order to exist, does not need a body. The body, in order to exist, does need a soul. So And I don't know where this is, but somewhere in Jewish mysticism, there's this idea that all souls were created on the sixth day of creation. And they're someplace in this beautiful, swirling soul library. and that they get attached to a person, but then when the person dies, the soul returns, and it's a process. It's this mystical process of souls being circulated through humanity over time. And so if a fetus stops being, the soul does not stop being. And so it stops being a problem for rabbis. Because if the fetus stops being, the soul will return and come back and find another. And that is what I know. And I'm sure if you ask a rabbi, you'll get 100. You'll ask 100 rabbis, you'll get 1,000,000 answers. But that is what I know about the soul and how it relates to the idea of a fetus. And Pastor Phil, do you have an answer? Okay.
Thank you both for really great presentations with a personal reflection, and that's really appreciated. I just have one footnote before my question that, the Pope, as a Catholic, there's a lot of pluralism within the church too, and not every cardinal speaks for the church. The Pope has given Biden communion, and so has the Archbishop of Washington. But here's my question, it's for you, Rabbi. When you mentioned the emergence of the head or during birth as it perhaps being interpreted as a pivotal point, could you elaborate on that and how that informs the question you've already addressed as far as human life?
So I will elaborate by reading a text or two. This is a difficult text, and I want to say that before reading it. This comes from Mishnah, which is our earliest law code. If a woman is having trouble giving birth, they cut up the fetus in her womb and bring it forth limb by limb, because her life comes before the life of the fetus. But if the greater part has come out, one may not touch it, for one may not set aside one person's life for that of another. So that once the child emerges, and according to this text, once the majority of the body of the child has come out, then we have to leave it to nature. We can no longer it no longer is our obligation to save the woman's life, because now their lives are equal. I have another text. If a pregnant woman's life is put at risk by a fetus, once the head has emerged, the baby may not be harmed to save the mother, because one life may not be pushed aside to save another life. And I actually have one other text that I want to share because I think it's really interesting. Let me see if I can find it. Where did I put it? Here. In the case of a pregnant woman who is taken by the court to be executed, the court does not wait to execute her until she gives birth. Rather, she is killed immediately. But with regard to a woman who is taken to be executed, who is in the process of birthing, in the throes of labor, the court waits to execute her until she gives birth. So that's another opinion. But what you see here is the variety of opinions, which all seem to agree that a fetus does not have the same status as a person who's already in existence, but there is there's a disagreement in all three about when life actually begins. So there's the head there's the majority of the body possibility, and then this Mishnah, it says that it's when she's in the throes of labor. So when labor has actually started, but not necessarily when the baby has emerged at all. Is that helpful? Okay. No. Maddie says, no, that is not at all helpful. It is confusing. Always we're left with more questions, right? This is what it means to be Jewish.
Again, I want to thank you very much. I really like the inter-religious conversations. It really makes me think more about my own religion. Thank you so much. So where does it come from? Where does the Catholic position come from? If it's not found in the Torah, if it's not found by statements from Jesus, is it the overriding thing about thou shalt not kill? Is it that simple? Or are there other nuances in the New Testament? Or is it a second guessing of what's in the Torah?
That's right. I wish it's an excellent question. I do not know the answer.
You don't know the answer.
I do not know where the Catholic. I do not know the Catholic answer. Maybe there is a Catholic in the room who could more aptly respond. I do know that I do think, well, I'm not going to try.
What about the fundamentalist or the evangelical point of view? Where does that come from?
Well, I would say that from my own understanding, and I have to claim this as my own, that at some point, and bioethicists have wrestled with this about when life begins. I would place it much earlier than some of what we heard Rabbi Mikey say. And in fact, that's the issue for me. The issue is, and it's oversimplifying the point, if I go to my garden and I plant some seeds, right, and they begin to germinate, is that organic? Is something happening there? And my answer in my head is yes. Something is. And so if somebody comes along and plucks those seeds out, then in my mind they stopped what was germinating. So it's probably more, to the answer, I think we have somebody who might be willing to answer that. Okay. Right. But
I can answer one of your questions.
You want to come here so that people can hear?
Okay, so I'm Roman Catholic, born, bred, cradle Catholic, for those that use that terminology. And to my understanding, we base our religion on scripture and tradition. Tradition is the ongoing unfolding development of what it is to be a Catholic. And while I have to tell you, I had no clue we were going to discuss abortion today. Had I known that, it was not publicized. So I'm coming in cold. Didn't even have a chance to look up things. I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but I'm coming in cold. Okay, all right, so we're all being surprised today. And then we come in and we start talking about abortion. I do know a few things. over our long history. Ensoulment, which someone brought up, there's been a difference of opinion on that over our history. And so dealing with this matter, I can say two things to you. In the documents of Vatican II, which is supposed to be our foundational documents in this age, and why did we have Vatican II? We had it because and I'm going to use very language that's going to maybe put some people off, but we stopped circling the wagons and we said, oh, these Protestants aren't going anywhere after 500 years. We better start dialoguing and opening up to the reality of our lives. Okay, we agree on that. Those documents of Vatican II carry a great deal of weight, but not with all Catholics. There was great enthusiasm right after 62 to 65. However, there was pushback, and it came from the highest levels. And so Vatican II almost got lost. But it has been championed now by Pope Francis, and he's getting pushed back. One of the comments that is made, and I would have brought this with me had I known what we were talking about. One of the documents of Vatican II speaks about the primacy of conscience. So that's all I can say to you right now because I really came totally unprepared. So that was one thing I wanted to tell you about Vatican II, primacy of conscience, if that's any help with that. There was another thought I had, but it's gone out of my mind, so it must not be. Well, ensoulment, I can't, it's differed. I did do some theological study, undergraduate and graduate, actually, but my undergraduate work was at Duquesne University. And this is where I learned about ensoulment and how that has differed in our tradition. The other thing, I just remember, thank you. I will say this to this group. I have read and heard it said that as many Catholic women are getting abortions as the general population. That's all I can say.
Thank you for that. That was wonderful because we didn't have the voice. It was a great question and we didn't have the perspective. Do you want to say anything, Pastor Phil?
The only thing that I want to follow up on the question about is that my analogy or my illustration is that, yeah, but about the garden, and again, I apologize for the oversimplification, but I know that I planted those seeds in the garden with love, but if the planter of the seed was violent, and I may not have wanted them in the garden, and so I think that is a situation when I would pull up the plant and say, I don't want this plant, I didn't plant it, it was forced on me, and you can kind of play that out as far as rape and incest, as well as other sort of extenuating circumstances. And to the point, it's the Catholic Church, I think I heard you say, ma'am, was tradition and scripture. In Protestantism, there's usually a fourfold understanding of life, and that is tradition, scripture, reason and experience. Reason and experience are key, especially in, they call it the quadrilateral in Wesleyism, in Methodism. And I kind of borrow from that because it kind of frames it up well for me, because even though it is the tradition of the church, perhaps an idea Scripture addresses, but it has to make sense and in our experience. So I think all of that together leads my denominations primarily probably to the point that it kind of leaves it with the individual. Yes, sir.
I don't want to make this a dialogue, but I have a follow-up question. How's that? So where does it come from? I mean, so where is this burning push that it's religion, it's in God's will that abortion is bad? Where does that come from? If it's not in the Torah, I mean, you can read everything you want in the Torah, not anything, but many things in the Torah. I got that. And it's not, Jesus didn't specifically address that. My thought is that it was easier when life was, we weren't able to save babies as early as the second month. As soon as we will be able to start life, life is there. We can keep that baby going. But it got more complicated when we realized, it used to be 3 months. Something people felt that wasn't a viable fetus at that time. And now it's viable, could be viable all the way back. And to me, that seemed like it put more fire, more flame on that fire, gasoline on that fire, and it made it explosive. But it seems to me it's a religious position in the fundamentalist and the evangelical question. It's not a tradition. It's not. It is. God says this, and that's my struggling with. Where does that happen?
I am not at all learned in the Christian tradition, but what it does say in Torah very explicitly over and over and over again is that we choose life, that we may live, right? That we are to preserve life. A human life is as if it's an entire world, right? A single human life. So the question, this is what Pastor Phil said, the question really gets to what is life, right? Because if you interpret life as the moment of conception or when there's a heartbeat, which is different from the Jewish perspective, but when you interpret it that way, then Torah, it's very easy to find in Torah or the Hebrew Bible verses that support not terminating pregnancy, right? And so I think it very much is an orientation to the text and also the way that you understand life. And what I really appreciate, I want to say this to you, Pastor Phil, is that what you created was a really important distinction, which I really appreciated. Using the planting of the seed metaphor, the idea that you do believe that life is started when seeds are planted and when things start to grow. And there's still nuance and reason, right? That the life or no life argument isn't enough in the conversation, that there's so much more to consider beyond that, and I appreciate that comment. And I also want to say one more thing. Maddie, I saw your hand, but really quickly, I want to just make one more note, which is that though in the Jewish tradition, life doesn't begin officially until well beyond what I think the Christian tradition believes, that doesn't mean that a fetus or the experience of pregnancy is nothing, right? We're talking about it because it falls in Jewish tradition. We're talking about it because it falls into this confusing gray area, and so the rabbis are grappling so hard with trying to figure out what it is. Right? That's why we have so much text here about it. So I just want to affirm that when a woman chooses to have an abortion, that's not nothing, right? It's not that, there wasn't a life. It's just, it's fine, right? There is a deep emotional and physical trauma that comes with making that decision, even if we don't consider a fetus to officially be life. And I just need to add that as a comment, which you helped me with your metaphor surface. So.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Maddie, you want to come up? Can you come up to the microphone so folks at home can hear you?
I can bring the mic back to you if you want.
Bring it down about 6. Yes. That's okay. I know it's a very, very difficult decision for a woman to make, and it's very sad that they reversed Roe versus Wade. Very, very sad for a lot of people. I mean, it's very difficult for a person to go in for an abortion. I know of people that have done it. I haven't had that bad luck of having to make that decision, but I know quite a few people of different faiths, Christian and Jewish, and they make that decision very hard. It was a very, very hard decision. But it's for all the reasons that we know. We can't afford another child when we have 4 and 5 children. And what do you do in Catholicism? You cannot have that abortion. But I think that people are waking up, and some people are having abortions in the Catholic faith because they have to. They just have to. And I know one person who was Catholic, and she had to get this dispensation, that's not the right word, dispensation from the higher up in her church, very Catholic, she had 3 children, one after the other, and had gotten very sick from that. Because you do. It takes a lot out of you having a baby. The men don't realize that, but it sure does. I just had 2, but it was not easy. If I had to have an abortion, it would be a very difficult decision for me. But if you have to do it, I don't think that any man, including the Supreme Court, should have made reversed the decision that was there 50 years. And that's my point, but I know that people still will not have the abortion. But what about the poor people that can't have another mouth to feed? What are they going to do down the road when that child is born? They talk about it. But what's going to happen to that child who's going to go into foster care if they have 5, 6 children? And we know that. We know that. Thank you. And thank you. The subject is, everybody has a different opinion.
I know I've spoken before, but I just was reminded, I was thinking in this conversation that often the Jewish position on abortion is seen as a rather liberal one in terms of when life begins. The irony, I find, is that the Jewish concept of when life should end is rather conservative, if I understand it properly. And I think it's kind of ironic in that you don't need to start a life-saving mechanism such as a vent, but if one is on a vent, it should not be taken off a vent. There are a lot of nuances, and it's very interesting because at least traditional Jews are very slow to end life, even though we have so many teachings about life, the life of the fetus or the value of the life of the pregnant woman.
I would like to put a plug in for 2 sessions from now when we will be talking about euthanasia. Beautiful. This was a beautiful plug for that conversation, and what a beautiful observation that we'll be talking about. Now we're talking about the beginning of life, and we'll be talking about the end of life in just a little while. Thank you, Ronnie. Such wisdom. Five minutes left. Time for one more question. If you have one, if you've been sitting on your hands. Are we done?
Are we going to, I know we're going to leave this for
Tell us what's next week's topic? Do you know?
Yes, I want to say on behalf of both of us and all the clergy that we are so sorry that this conversation about abortion, which is not an easy conversation, was a surprise to you. And I do not know.
Not to me,
Okay.
I think different congregations may have put out different information.
Really? Were some informed?
Plus, I think it was announced at the end of the last session what this session was going to be about. No, I thought Rabbi Joseph announced it.
I will look up on my phone what the next session will be about.
Okay. All right. So Rabbi Mikey is going to look up the next topic. Thank you, and hang tight until she gets that. But thank you for choosing to be here. There's so much you can be doing with this time. We're honored that you chose it to be here. And Mikey and Rabbi Mikey, I am grateful for her. The purpose of prayer is next week's topic. Thank you. But Rabbi Mikey is a true gift to this Interfaith Center. So thanks, Mikey, for being here.
Thanks, guys. You're fine, really good. And what I found interesting is that Judaism talks about how there's so many different opinions, and my Jewish friends give me a hard time about that because I always answer it all depends. And I found your statements about Christianity has the same many different positions.
Right.
How many Christian denominations are there?
Thousands, yeah, we can't get along.
Well, we have a hard time getting, everybody has to get along. I got 2 wives, so I mean, everybody has a hard time.
Yeah, good to see you, Phil.
Rabbi Mikey, I want you to meet my friend Mimi.
you be in contact